All right, today we are talking about conditional statements, start of Unit 2, proofs and reasoning. So let's look at, and I'm going to highlight some definitions that are already on this page. So conditional statements, or often called if-then statements. Conditional statement is a statement such as, if you are reading this page, then you are studying math. So you see the if and then a statement, and then it's followed by a then with another statement, okay, and they're tied together. Two more terms, so conditional statements, that's what a conditional statement is. Two more terms for that is, in conditional statements, the first part of the statement is the hypothesis. The second part of the statement is the conclusion, okay? So what it says right here, the phrase immediately following the word if, so after the if is the hypothesis, and after the word then is the conclusion, right? So let's take a look here and practice with the first two statements we see here. The first, it says to underline the hypothesis, and then we're going to circle the conclusion. Okay, so watch what I do here. I'm going to, I've got all my colors going here. Underlining the hypothesis, I'm going to underline life gives you lemons. Okay, that is after the word if. I don't circle or I don't underline if. I'm just going to underline the portion after the word if, and that's my hypothesis. And then I'm going to circle my conclusion. So make some lemonade is the conclusion for that. Okay. The second statement is not written as an if-then statement. So let's write it as an if-then statement. Sometimes it says, for sparkly teeth by Pearly White's toothpaste. Sounds like an advertisement. But let's rewrite it as a conditional statement. So sometimes we have to add some extra words. We're definitely going to have our if, and we're going to have our then. So for sparkly white teeth, let's say if you want sparkly white teeth, white teeth. Okay, so if you want that, comma, then buy Pearly White's toothpaste. Okay. So now let's go back and underline our hypothesis. You want sparkly white teeth. And then circle our conclusion, buy Pearly White's toothpaste. Okay, so that's what that will look like. Okay, related conditionals. Says over here, if you change the hypothesis and conclusion of a conditional statement, you form a related conditional. So a statement related to the original conditional statement. There's 4 different related conditional statements. And you'll need to know these, okay? You're going to need to know each of these. So, first of all, on this, a couple of things and symbols you see here. The arrow means if then. Okay, that's what it means. The P where can I write this? The P is the hypothesis, and the Q is the conclusion. Okay. So if P then Q is our traditional order of the conditional statement, the hypothesis comes first and then the conclusion, okay? So in the problem we have here, if you have a cold, let's see. So you have a cold is our hypothesis. Then you need a tissue. You need a tissue, or you need tissues is our conclusion. So that's the original conditional statement. The converse of that, to write the converse of that statement, we switch the hypothesis and the conclusion. They're going to switch places, okay? So I'm going to have if, I have my if and then, but the tissues is going to come first. So if you need tissues, then you have a cold. Okay, so what I did is I just flip-flopped these. Okay, that's what the converse does. Okay, the inverse, watch this. Got a squiggly P and a squiggly Q. Okay. And the squiggle, I wrote this down at the bottom. The squiggle means not. Okay. So that's what the squiggle means. It means not. So you're going to negate both of these statements. I'm going to have my if and then. They will be in the same order. So you have a cold is still going to come first, but we're going to say if you don't have a cold. Then you don't need tissues. Okay, so we switched those around, or we didn't switch those around, we negated both of them. We kept them in the same order as the original up here. Okay, we negated both the hypothesis and the conclusion. All right, contrapositive, look what we're going to do here. We're going to negate it and switch the order. Okay, so we're going to take the conclusion and write it first, but also make it negative. If you don't need tissues, and then we're going to take the hypothesis and write it negatively, then you don't have a cold. All right, the last type of statement is called a biconditional statement. All right, so watch how this works. We're going to put an arrow like that on both, or arrows on both sides. And what that means is if and only if. Okay, so keep the same order as the original. And we're going to say, oops, and you drop the if and the then, okay? And so you just take your hypothesis, you have a cold, if, let me write that in a different color. Okay, so my hypothesis without the if part, and then in the middle you're going to put if and only if. And then your conclusion. If and only if you need tissues. So you have a cold, if and only if you need tissues. Okay? And that statement is only valid, what it says down here, a biconditional statement is only valid when the conditional and converse are both true statements. Okay? So we're going to look at the truth value of these. So my conditional statement, if you have a cold, then you need tissues. That would be true. Okay? But then the converse, if you need tissues, then you have a cold, is not true. You could need tissues because you're crying, or you could need tissues for some other reason. Okay? Doesn't mean you have a cold. So since the conditional and the converse are not both true, then the biconditional is not valid, okay? It's not valid. Okay. And we're going to practice with the next part. Okay? So this is going to be page 22, and then the bottom is page 23 in your book. And let's just take a look at what we've got here. It says match the following. Match the following with their correct term using a conditional statement given, then find the truth value of each. Okay? So the statement says, if you live in Miami, then you live in Florida. Okay, that's my conditional statement. So that's the first one. And that is true. If you live in Miami, then you're in Florida. You live in Florida. Okay. Let's go back to the first, number one. I wanted to mark the conditional first. That's our original statement. Number one, let's see how they've changed it. If you don't, okay, so that's negative. If you don't live in Florida, then you don't live in Miami. The hypothesis and the conclusion have changed, okay? The Florida and Miami have flip-flopped, and we've added the not. We've negated both of those. So that is going to be a contrapositive statement, and that is actually true. If you don't live in Miami, then, if you don't live in Florida, then you can't live in Miami. Okay, so that would be true. The second statement, if you don't live in Miami, then you don't live in Florida. So the order of these is the same. We've just added the nots, the negating of those. And so that would be, when you add the negative to each statement, that would be an inverse. So that would be C. And that would be false. Okay? That would be false because you could live in some other place. You could live in Orlando. You're still in Florida. You could live in Pensacola, and you're still in Florida. You could live in Panama City, and you're still in Florida. You could live in Tampa, and you're still in Florida. So that statement would be false. Number 3, you live in Miami if and only if you live in Florida. So that if and only if, that is also the only statement that doesn't start with an if. That's always going to be your biconditional. And we will come back to whether that is valid or not in just a minute. Finally, number 5, if you live in Florida, then you live in Miami. We have just reversed the order of the original, and so that would be the converse. Okay, the converse. So what's the truth value of that? If you live in Florida, then you live in Miami. No, again, you could live in any of those other cities we talked about before, so that would be false. Okay. And those cities that I mentioned, those would be considered what we would call counterexamples. Counterexample is an example that proves a statement is false. Okay, so Orlando, perhaps. Okay, or any of those other towns in Florida. There's a lot of them. Okay, now remember we said on the previous page that for the biconditional to be valid, the conditional statement has to be true and the converse has to be true. So since they're not both true, the biconditional is not a valid statement. All right, at this point, I gave everybody a chance to work on and try these out for yourself, to write the different statements and then determine the truth value of each. So, first of all, I'm going to highlight the hypothesis, it is raining. And I'm going to highlight the conclusion, the ground is wet. Okay, if it is raining, the ground is wet. That would be true. I forgot to switch it over. Okay, so that would be true. Now let's write the converse. So if, then, okay, converse, remember you switch the order, okay? So I'm going to say if the ground is wet, then it is raining. Okay, is that true or false? That is actually going to be false. The ground is wet. You could have been washing your car, or you could have been watering your lawn. Okay, there's other reasons for the ground to be wet, or a pipe could have burst and there's water going everywhere. Okay, so not true. All right. Then for inverse, what do we do there? Okay, so inverse, we negate or add not to each statement. So they stay in the same order, but I'm going to say and I'm going to make a contraction there to save us a few letters. If it isn't raining, so if it is not raining, then the ground is not wet. Okay. If it isn't raining, then the ground isn't wet. That would also be false because, like we said before, you could have a counterexample would be washing your car or watering your lawn instead of it raining. Okay. Contrapositive, we're going to do all the things, okay? So we're going to switch the order and make it negative. So if the ground isn't wet, that's like net, isn't wet, then it isn't raining. And I should have made that blue. Sorry, I messed up on my color code there. I'll highlight it blue. Okay, so yeah, switch the order on those. Now, if the ground isn't wet, then it isn't raining. That would be true. Okay, and then finally, We'll take the statement for biconditional. So we're going to take the hypothesis, it is raining. I'm going to add my if and only if. And then I'll put my conclusion. It is raining if and only if the ground is wet. Okay, is that a valid statement or not? So let's go back and check the truth values of my original statement and my converse. Okay, one is true and one is false. So that means that this statement would not be valid. They both have to be true to be valid. Okay. So I'm going to go back to these notes over here real quick and just add some statements to it. Okay, so our conditional statement is always just our original statement. Converse, we switch. Oh, can't spell switch. Switch. Okay, so switch the order. Inverse, we negate or add not to it. And contrapositive, we do both. Negate and switch the order. And then, of course, the biconditional is just the if and only if, which you can abbreviate as IFF, so if and only if. So you need to memorize those, be able to use them, and that's it.